Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. This video will be a review of the now couple years old Shout Select Blu-ray release of the classic murder mystery comedy Murder by Death from 1976. This is a must for mystery fans and fans of both classic mystery films, detective films, and classic detective fiction because it's essentially playing with the form and using caricatures of the famous characters of literary and film fiction played by iconic stars, and it's one of those films that it's a very select breed, the murder mystery comedy, where it's sort of got a fourth wall breaking aspect to it, so it's sort of in on the joke. This is the best film to double feature pair with the 1985 masterpiece Clue, and in fact, a lot of what Clue does, I think you could say, is maybe predated a bit or first done here to an extent in Murder by Death, written by Neil Simon. So it has the Neil Simon pedigree and again has the fantastic cast of star actors and wonderful wit and charm. It's just one of those films that I every time I come back to it, I enjoy it for what it is, but I wind up wishing that it was a little bit more developed outside of some of the more basic jokes. And you can definitely see what Clue does differently and improves on over this film, which has a great concept and a great idea, and it takes a little while to get going. But this is a film you're watching much more for the charm aspect, the fantastic cast of huge names, and also seeing them play around in the sort of cliches of detective fiction, detective films, and seeing them also tackle these caricatures of the famous detectives. So that runs the gamut from Peter Sellers playing a hilarious caricature parody, not just of Charlie Chan, but how many Asian characters were portrayed in films of the 30s and 40s. Not necessarily how Chan himself was portrayed, but then you also have Sir Alec Guinness as the butler, but of course this butler happens to be completely blind. So this is already telling you what sort of film you're going into. There's Maggie Smith and the incomparable David Niven as a version of Nick and Nora Charles from the Thin Man films. Of course, the names are all slightly changed, but they have their dog in tow, so there's something for Thin Man lovers. Elsa Lanchester plays a version of Mrs. Marple. Then you have the wonderful James Coco as a pretty funny version of a very fussy Poirot. And then Peter Falk plays a really funny version. It's supposed to be of Sam Spade, but it's sort of a blending of the Sam Spade archetype along with the archetype of the classic 30s and 40s film noir detective. And he's also doing all these little Bogart-isms, and there are some lines expressly directed to be Bogart-esque. So it's basically him doing a sort of Bogart knockoff performance, which is all wonderfully done. It's very very endearing, and just as all of the performances are to these original characters. He's also accompanied by Eileen Brennan as his sort of Girl Friday or the secretary character from the Maltese Falcon, and of course she is the direct link to Clue because of course she played Mrs. Peacock wonderfully in that 1985 film. So again, this is sort of, I think, the best dry run for the type of film that Clue is. So if you're very familiar with Clue, if you've never seen Murder by Death, it's definitely a wonderful film, but it's not quite as energetic and pointed. So again, like I said, it's very much a sort of dry run for what Clue would become in the 1980s. So again, this is a Neil Simon story. He wrote the screenplay, so he was getting to do this instead of writing the play. And the film itself was produced by Ray Stark and directed by Robert Moore, who had done some television work, but this was essentially his first feature. And unfortunately, I do think you can kind of tell that he had a television background because there is, a significant part of the film that does sort of feel a bit television-ish. The staging is not always the most complex, and it's not extraordinarily visually impressive. But then again, it is pretty much confined to the single set of the mansion, which it's actually a pretty intricate set for a film of this era, 1976, being made at Columbia with not the largest budget in the world. So obviously the budget primarily is going on the star talent. So while I wish that the film took more opportunities at times, that's not exactly what it's about. It's about getting all these people in a room and getting them to play off each other, and then to just have this sparkling wits start to emerge and all these gags after all the various plot setups. So the general thrust of the plot, of course, is that all these famous detectives are invited to the same mansion on the same night, and of course they are eventually greeted by the mysterious owner and reclusive rich millionaire, of course played by Truman Capote of all people. So it was a bit of a feat to get him to actually be in the movie, and he's quite wonderful in this very quirky part. Essentially, he is a fan of detective fiction, as we all are. He's essentially tired of all the cop-outs in mystery novels and films, and not being able to actually figure out who did it until the very end. And there are reveals that are only given at the end by the detectives to make them look cleverer than the reader or the watcher of the film. So, and I guess a sort of meta aspect, I guess all these characters are meant to be real characters, but then, their stories are retold, or they star in their own films of their own real life stories. But essentially, he's decided to come up with the greatest murder case ever that will be impossible for them to solve, and places a cash prize, and they're all locked in this mansion overnight until they can, or for the weekend, until they can, figure out who did it or admit their failure and be humiliated in the world. So it's an interesting setup, and it very much plays around with the whole concept of loving mystery films and mystery stories and these classic characters, but not always enjoying the cliches of the form. So it's playing around with this stuff, and it's coming from a fan perspective. Neil Simon readily admitted he loved all these characters and loved these stories growing up and loved going to these films. So it was sort of a love letter to that, and you definitely get that sense throughout. My issue with the film always is that it's a great concept and it's a great cast, but it takes a long time to get going. You'll notice when you see this film, the opening is a bit slow, which is fine. But once it gets going, it's really fun, and then all of a sudden it's over. So this is one of those films that I always wish there was a part two or another act, because the first act just feels so long, and so it takes quite a while to get going, that by the time the murder has happened and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and all of their quirkiness is coming to the surface while they're yelling at each other and accusing each other of murder back and forth, and the hijinks continue to go on in this mansion, and they get more and more to a fever pitch. Once all that's going, it's great, but then again, all of a sudden it's over, and the ending is fun because there's not just one reveal and plot twist, but there's multiple ones stacked on each other. So it is very much playing around with the final denouement of a detective story or film suddenly having a plot twist, and the murderer is this person, but Murder by Death is playing around with that, and so it has not one, not two, but I think about 5 or 6 of those. So, and that's not giving anything away. You kind of know it's going to do something quirky like that. So the most fun you get is seeing these great actors interacting with each other and having fun with the material, and then Neil Simon having fun with the form of the detective story or detective film. So again, I wish it was better. I still adore this film. There's nothing else quite like it. And again, I do really think it is the dry run for Clue, but it is a little bit simple in the staging, and the first act. The more you rewatch this film, you'll notice the first act really it does drag a little bit. It is a little bit slow, so that may put off first time viewers, because it does take quite a while to get going. Really, more about 20 or 30 minutes, and that's a good significant chunk of the film's runtime. But basically, once all the characters get in the mansion and they sort of figure out what's going on, and Truman Capote's character appears for the first time and sort of lays down what his scheme is, and then vanishes in a theatrical way. Once all that happens and you get the setup of the film, then everybody's off to the races. So that's really always been my issue with this film. I wish there was more. Once I get invested in it, it's like I could have done with another maybe 10 or 20 minutes of extra things of them running around in the mansion, and the runtime isn't that long, so it probably could have afforded that. I should also mention there were some extra scenes shot that were included in a TV version that you can actually view on YouTube. It totals to about 2 to 3 minutes of extra bits. They're very small. One of them indicates something that I've read about. Apparently there was a slight different slight difference in the original ending that was either changed on the stage or may have been shot and removed, but it seems like it was changed on the stage at the time, and it would have involved the most famous of fictional detectives, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. But apparently that was removed, and so one of the deleted scenes in the TV cut is a little tiny tag at the very ending where all of a sudden Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson show up. So it's a fun little bit, and all the little trims they really should have kept in. They're very tiny, and they're all nice little pieces. But I can understand removing them for time. But unfortunately, they're not on any video release, and I will talk about that in a minute when I talk about the extras on this disc and why I'm a little disappointed that, well, I'm very disappointed that those couldn't have been included or at least mentioned anywhere. So we move on to the Shout disc itself, which came out a couple years ago, and I didn't get this for the longest time because Shout releases are usually a bit pricier in terms of their list price. This is part of the Select series, which is supposed to be their choice titles with better transfers and nice extras and things like that. But these, again, because it's Shout Factory, they're almost always significantly pricier. They always have a higher price tag than the equivalent releases from other labels. And also the masters they use, they're not always new scans. And like this one in particular, it is a older studio provided master, so it is unfortunately not a new scan, which is probably the biggest issue I have with this. However, right off the bat, they did restore the incredibly amazing Charles Addams artwork, which I'll move in closer for you here, where all the characters are interacting with each other, and then you have the dead body with all the knives stuck in the back. So, I mean, this is how you want the film displayed. Unfortunately, when Sony did their DVD, as I have here, they went with this very generic sort of whodunit art design. Get some of the glare off. I mean, it's fine, but when you have Charles Addams artwork, it's just, why did somebody have to do this? So thankfully, now we don't have to deal with this anymore. And of course, as you see here, I have the original Laserdisc from the early 90s, the widescreen version, which does have the Charles Addams artwork across the entirety of the jacket. It's not quite as wide dimensions-wise, but, this just some extra dead space outside the characters, which they fit on the jacket. So that's one reason to definitely have or hang on to the Laserdisc is for the jacket art. That was the first reason why I wanted to get it, because originally I just had this DVD with the unfortunately very generic looking art. I'll show you the interior. So I like the disc label. You get all the characters in this interesting sort of yellow tint to match the title, so that's nice. And then the inlay art is a scene of Capote's character Lionel Twain explaining his frustrations with all of them while they're all gathered at dinner. And once again, sorry for all the glare on the plastic. And unfortunately, there's no booklet or anything. Then here is the rear, done in their typical Shout Select style. So as you can see, there is clearly no indication this is a new master. So I'm pretty sure this is the same master Sony made for the DVD, but just in a higher resolution. Sony was one of the studios to really embrace HD early on. So if you look on their DVD cases, and you can do that on this release, you'll notice down here at the bottom that it says mastered in high definition. So Sony was making 720p, 1080i, and 1080p masters very early on in the DVD era. So a lot of Blu-ray releases of Sony titles have used those masters, but in their source HD, if they're able to do that, that's what they're provided with, or that's what they get from Sony, unless somebody's doing a new scan or a new restoration, which Shout has done sometimes, but this is one of the cases where they did not. In terms of the extras, the primary draw, the only new thing, is a audio commentary with Lee Gambin, who's done a number of commentaries. But unfortunately, this track, there's two issues I have with it. One, it's a fine commentary. It's very conversational. It's easy to listen to. But at the end of it, you don't really get a lot of new material. I think the best material is when he's talking about the director's career, Robert Moore, and some of his background. That seems to be the meat of what you're getting out of the commentary, outside of a little biographical info on each of the main stars, which, if you know about them at all, you pretty much know most of that stuff anyway. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a lightweight commentary track. I don't know if I'll listen to it again once I've, now that I've heard it all the way through. I mean, I appreciate any sort of new extra, and I always appreciate a commentary, but this is one of those where it's kind of, I don't know if you're going to get very much out of returning to it all that often. But the bigger problem, and I don't know why this happened, I don't know if it's the recording or the mastering or something, but the audio of the actual commentary is extremely garbled. It'll throw you at first because you think, something's wrong with the disc, or, you messed up something on one of your speakers or something. But no, that's how the commentary is on the actual track. So you have to get used to that. It almost sounds like, I don't know if this was maybe recorded over Zoom or something, but I don't think so. So I don't know how that happened, but unfortunately the actual audio quality of the commentary itself is not very good. So again, I don't know if that was just something that went wrong in the recording or the mastering, or when it was put on this disc. But unfortunately, the actual listenability of the commentary track itself, just physically listening to it, is not very good. So that's unfortunate. And also, what I was disappointed with, he didn't really go into or mention any of the production background or any of the various factoids or the alternate casting choices that were sought after. I think he mentioned some of them, but I've read a number of those, and there are some urban legends as well. And then there was no discussion of the extended cut of the film, the missing pieces. I think he did mention the slightly changed ending, but I wished it had gone into more detail on that, because that's what I was most looking forward to from a commentary on this film. So unfortunately, I can't really recommend the commentary. It's okay. It's a fine listen, but but you listen to it once, and it's sort of like watching the film with somebody who really likes it. But you're not going to get a whole lot of additional information that you're not going to get outside of reading the IMDb trivia page. And also, the actual audio quality of the commentary is subpar. So I don't know why that happened. It's unfortunate, and that should have been something somebody caught, but unfortunately it was not. Then you get the DVD extras ported over. So there's a conversation with Neil Simon. It's about a 10-minute featurette. It's an interview piece with Neil Simon talking about his love of detective fiction growing up and detective films, why he did this, and his experiences making the film and being on the set during production. That was created for the DVD, so you can retire your DVD copy because that's been ported over. It also includes the theatrical trailer, and then it also has actually a pretty substantial photo gallery. What's great about this, it's not just lobby cards and stills, but it also includes the original press book. It may be a little hard to read. You will have to pause to try and read it, but it's got the original press book and the original publicity materials with bits and factoids about the stars and their work in coming into this film. So that was a really nice touch, and something I didn't expect because it just said photo gallery. So I expected just a handful of photos for, like 2 or 3 minutes with some music overlaid. So that was a really nice touch. Shout didn't have to do that, but they I guess they apparently found original publicity materials, scanned them in, and included those. So that was a really nice touch that I did very much appreciate. And unfortunately, that's it for the extras. So again, the DVD didn't have much, but everything on the DVD has been ported over, so you can retire your Sony DVD. Now, to talk about the transfer and the audio, as I alluded to before, I'm pretty positive this is using an older Sony master, because unfortunately the HD presentation on this disc, while it is significantly better than the DVD because it is 1080p HD, it is an older master. You can very much tell that. It has a rather soft looking appearance most of the time, and it does not look very good. I mean, it looks fine. Again, don't get me wrong. It looks much better than the DVD, but when you put the DVD in and you compare them side by side, it seems pretty obvious they are from the same or similar source master. And then, you can imagine what even a 2K scan of a negative source of this film, or an interpositive or something, it would have resulted in a much improved image, because there's no telling how old this master is. And there's no telling what the source scan was like. And again, my guess is that it dates back to the HD master Sony made for the DVD, because it seems very, very similar. So unfortunately, I can't really recommend this disc for the higher Shout Select price tag that it has, because unfortunately it's not a new master, it's not a new scan. The picture quality is not that much improved over the DVD. You do get the improvements of it being a Blu-ray and in full 1080p HD. So, I would get this over the DVD if you had to. But if you've had the DVD for a while like me, this would be a title. Wait till you can get it on sale, because it will be a bit underwhelming if you pay full price for it. I wish this had gotten a new scan. That's what I really wish. It still needs one, really. This is fine for what it is, but it shouldn't be at a premium pricing level. This is like a studio catalog title, like say Paramount releasing one of their older DVD era catalog titles as a movie only Blu-ray for $10 or $12. This is that type of HD transfer. It is a much older master. And what's also unfortunate, this doesn't have any of the TV cut additional scenes. They're not included on here whatsoever. They're not really alluded to or mentioned. And there's nothing about the original ending. It would have been really impressive, and what somebody should have done, if the elements are around, if they're available, it would be to scan those additional scenes and include them as extras, or actually include the TV cut that features all of them. So maybe make a branching version with those little scenes put back in. I think it's about 4 of them. Again, thankfully, you can actually watch them on YouTube. People have uploaded their old taped from broadcast versions and uploaded those specific little bits. Again, it's not a whole lot. A total is still about two minutes or so total. But that's a real missed opportunity, I think, with this release, to even just include them in standard definition, if that's how they exist, as extras. So that was my biggest disappointment right off the bat, that this didn't include those or mention them or have an extended cut of the film. But essentially, picture-wise, you're just getting an HD version of what you already had on DVD, unfortunately. Now, in terms of the audio, this has the original mono mix in DTS HD master audio, so it is lossless encoded. And honestly, all 3 versions sound good. This is thankfully a film that hasn't been subjected to crazy amounts of noise reduction or remixing or anything. It's a very straightforward mono track with a pretty nice Dave Grusin score. But the mono in here sounds really nice, and I had a hard time flipping between all 3 copies, but particularly the Laserdisc and the Blu-ray here. I was trying to see, as I usually do, if there are any differences, or if one sounds better than the other, or one has more dynamic range, or one has less hiss reduction, all that type of techie stuff. And flipping between the Laserdisc and the DVD and the Blu-ray, they're all pretty much the same. I will say that in really scrutinizing them, I think the Laserdisc has maybe a touch more bass in some of the score moments, but this is just like scrutinizing very, very heavily. Whereas it is definitely the same audio source. You can that's very clear, because they are pretty much identical. But I think at times the Blu-ray does sound a little bit better. It has a touch more clarity here and there. But then the Laserdisc has a touch more bass here and there, and maybe a slightly less hiss reduction here. It's again, it's pretty much a washout between the two. You can really have either or and be perfectly fine. And again, the DVD also sounds great. So this is one where it's pretty much the same audio source on all 3 versions, and it's not been messed around with or remixed or hit with a bunch of EQ or something. And when you pull them into, say, Audacity, and you're looking at the waveforms, they look pretty darn near identical. So it's only little tiny, very minuscule differences. So thankfully, this is a title that you can get the Blu-ray and the audio is fully intact and hasn't been messed with. Personally, what I will be doing is probably I will be passing on my DVD to somebody who hasn't seen this film, and I will have the Blu-ray, and that'll be probably my go-to version from now on. But I will be hanging on to the Laserdisc, because I've had this for a long time, and I love the art, and I love the jacket. It just looks fantastic. But what's also great is the Laserdisc didn't have any extras outside of the trailer, but it had a really fantastic bit of liner notes on the back, which is very common for Sony Columbia Laserdiscs. But I'll include a photo of the liner notes so you can read them at your convenience because, again, this goes into quite a bit of detail and actually more detail than what you get in the commentary track. What's also great is it actually includes vintage interview quotes from Neil Simon, Truman Capote, and the director Robert Moore actually talking about the film. And then there's a whole paragraph about some of the casting changes. Like apparently they originally tried to get Myrna Loy to essentially play the comic version of Nora Charles, but she turned it down. She didn't really want to do a comedic takeoff on her most iconic character. So then Maggie Smith was brought in. Apparently Orson Welles was attached to the film for quite some time, but then was either dropped out or had to do something else. Some of these are apocryphal. I don't know if they're 100% true. I think some are maybe urban legends, because I've heard that Orson Welles was either attached to this film or was cast for a while, or it was a sort of, they thought about it after the fact. So I've heard it all three different ways. It goes on to say that once that supposedly happened, that James Coco became the Poirot knockoff character, and then Peter Sellers took over as the Charlie Chan knockoff character. Now, I should also mention that, of course, while Alec Guinness was making this film, very famously, this was the film that he was making when he got the script for Star Wars. So in between takes, he was reading that script, and people would just wander over and ask, "Oh, hey, what's that?" And Neil Simon remembers doing this, and that was the first time anybody had ever heard of Star Wars. So that's a fun little tidbit, and I'm sure probably the number one reason why most people are even aware of this film now is that this was the film Alec Guinness was making when he got the script and decided he was going to do Star Wars. So that's why I'm hanging on to the Laserdisc. And again, I still really like the art. And again, as I said before, it's kind of debatable which has the better audio, the Laserdisc or the Blu-ray HDMA track. I mean, they are pretty much the same. So that's just another reason why I'm hanging on to the LD. And it's also not a super common LD, and this is the widescreen version. So just one of those very frameable LD jackets too. I'd also like to take a moment to mention what a lot of people in modern times come to this film seem to have some issue with, or don't have a whole lot of background in, and that is the sort of caricature of the Charlie Chan character called Sidney Wang, played by Peter Sellers, who had played a number of characters in comedic films before and after this that were of different ethnicities. And here in this film, all the detective characters you see are not expressly, doing those characters. They are all comedic takeoffs on them. So they're not quite as noble or as always 100% as intelligent as their original literary counterparts. Hence, the Poirot counterpart in this film is a bit of a food-obsessed buffoon. So it's playing around with things. But when you look at the Sidney Wang character, it is also making fun of how Hollywood treated Asian characters and, did not use Asian actors in those particular roles. So it's really playing that stuff up with things like the makeup and the costuming, which has more of a Fu Manchu type appearance in the majority of the film when he changes into the sort of red robe looking outfit. So you have to have a sort of understanding of Hollywood history and how these films were made to get all of the various jokes. So if you come in cold and you're not too aware of these characters, I don't know how effective this film is going to be, because it does take a degree of knowledge of some of these pre-existing stories and the form of detective fiction and detective films in classic Hollywood. But when you look at the Charlie Chan films themselves, yes, it's always, not the first couple films, but the main Fox and Monogram films that form the main famous series. The three primary actors are not themselves Chinese, and so they are, playing a Chinese character, and that's obviously a part of the way films were made at that time. It's regrettable, of course, and I completely understand people having issues with that, but you have to look at them in the historical context of when they were made. It is also interesting that the first attempts at making Charlie Chan films did use Asian actors in the role, and those films were not successful. We can't see all of them because unfortunately some are lost, but they also had issues with adapting the novels in the first couple films anyway. But it's interesting to note that, again, the characters in Murder by Death are not necessarily the representative of fully of the detectives they are based on. So when you go and you actually look at the original Charlie Chan films, most particularly the Warner Oland Fox films, which are classics in their own right, and most especially the original Earl Durr Bigger novels, those were expressly created. He created the whole character of Charlie Chan to be an anti-Fu Manchu, to be a positive Chinese character, which had pretty much never happened before. And then when they finally started the Fox films with Warner Oland, those do replicate pretty much everything that you get in the original 6 books quite well, but it's not always in your face. There is a lot of subtle social commentary going on. So while they could not be as distinct and obvious as the original novels, because they were B films made in the 30s at Fox, after all, you do get a lot of Charlie Chan dealing with racism and judgmental other characters, and managing to always still be the smartest person in the room and putting them in their place, and all with honor and dignity, and a little touch of humor here and there. And of course the famous aphorisms that some people love, some people hate, but that's just part of the character's DNA. So you're getting a sort of riff on that in the film, but a lot of people have issues with it being Peter Sellers and heavy makeup doing this. But again, you have to understand this is a sort of riff on that character, but it's also a riff on how Hollywood treated Asian characters. So that's why he has the awful eye makeup and all those things that they would do to these actors that they would cast in these roles. So like a lot of the jokes in the film, some of it is actually about how detective films were made or how detective novels were written. So if you don't have too much experience with classic mystery films, or you're not a big fan of classic mystery literature, you might want to bone up on that a little bit before going into this, because again, I don't know how much you're going to get out of it if you don't have at least some basis in that. And this is really a film made for mystery lovers. It's fun. It's a joy to come back to. There are one-liners that are very biting, and also bits of humor that are actually very striking, because it's not all slapstick, and it goes in different. It branches off at different points that you don't quite expect. So again, it's not a film for everybody, but it is very much geared towards mystery buffs and fans of these classic characters. But again, understand that it's sort of a wacky riff on the idea of these characters, not necessarily the characters themselves. So that's my review for the Shout Select Blu-ray of Murder by Death. Unfortunately, it's not a disc I can particularly recommend unless you can get it on sale. If you can do that, I think it's a fine Blu-ray, but it should not be priced as a Shout Select title, because unfortunately the transfer is rather lacking. The audio is fine, thankfully. It sounds great. I did appreciate the photo gallery with the press materials, and it ports over the DVD extras, but not having the TV scenes included in some fashion, or an extended cut of the film, or additional information on the production was really disappointing. So that's what I would expect from a Shout Select title, and unfortunately that, and it being an old master, and the commentary being presented very poorly. Again, the quality of the actual audio content on that track is just, it should have been caught in QC, but I don't know if anybody checked it, or if it just somehow got messed up at some point and it was missed, because it's defective, unfortunately. It's still listenable, but it sounds like the audio from a Zoom call at times, or like, you're talking to somebody on a very distant phone line. So you will have to deal with that if you listen to it. So yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit of an underwhelming Blu-ray. So I would definitely say wait till it's on sale, or if you find it used at a good price, then I think it's a much better option, because I don't think the list price is. I don't think you're getting your money's worth. I think for that it would at least need a new scan and a new master presentation made. Again, this is the perfect film to double feature with Clue if you love that film like I do, and you always wondered if there was anything else quite like it. This is its spiritual predecessor. It has that same sort of inherent wackiness and making some of these characters look ridiculous in the enclosed space. So I've wondered for a number of years if maybe, because John Landis was the one who put the Clue script together and put the whole project together and developed it. So I always wondered if he somehow had this film in the back of his mind when he was working on developing Clue, because it seems like Clue expands upon things in Murder by Death and also makes some distinct improvements and sort of polishes some rough edges. So that's why I think they're perfect to watch back to back, because they're sort of linked with their core central theme. I do think Clue is the much better film, but this is still a joy to come back to, and you're really coming to it for how it plays around with the form, some of the wonderful witty Neil Simon dialogue and jokes, and seeing all these great actors and some of these legends interact with each other in the same room in this sort of witty wink at the audience, or wink with the audience, I should say, play on the classic detective story form. So that's again my review for the Shout Factory Shout Select Blu-ray of Murder by Death, which is a film I love to come back to every couple of years, and I can now do it on the Blu-ray. But again, because it's an underwhelming transfer, I would recommend waiting till Shout has one of their sales, or until you can get it on sale somewhere else. I wish it was better. I wish it had a new transfer, but unfortunately, that's just where the film stands right now. Until maybe somebody else licenses it out and does a special edition, which unfortunately, I don't see that coming at any point in time. So I think this is the best you can do at this particular point. So as always, please leave any comments you have below, or if you want to talk more about the film, I love finding out more or talking about this film. It's a fun film to discuss with other people. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.